Everyone's favorite console generation generally lies with the consoles they grew up with. Probably when they're like 7 through 10. Mine was pretty standard, being a big PlayStation 2 and GameCube kid. When I was a little younger, I had tried the Nintendo 64 with my cousins. My fondest memories of then were games like Mario 64 and Pokemon Snap. 6-year-olds like myself weren't interested in anything else on the 64, so when my cousin tried to show me Majora's Mask, I was actually kind of afraid of it, which delayed my interest in Zelda for a long time. My cousin also tried to sell me on Banjo-Kazooie, which seemed pretty lame to me at the time. Apparently I was in the minority because a ton of people really enjoyed Banjo-Kazooie. I remember around 2010, when we were in this strange internet renaissance for Rareware, how the evil Microsoft stole them away from our beloved and flawless Nintendo. And totally not because Nintendo didn't care enough to not sell their stocks in the studio. Around the same time, the indie revolution that's been propelling itself over the last decade came into prominence, where we saw a huge amount of games inspired by 80s and 90s 2D games. So it was only a matter of time until we got something like a late 90s collectathon. In 2015, Playtonic dropped their own Kickstarter for Yooka-Laylee, boasted a return of the classic collectathon, and raised a cool $2 million for the development. 2 years later, they released their game to mixed reception. Were the chameleon and bat able to stand on their own legs, or do they fall down trying to lean too much on the world's beloved bear and Breagle? Welcome to Yooka-Laylee. Okay, so let's make some things clear. I have never played Banjo-Kazooie. Everything I know is from the reviews I've read on the internet. So I'll do my best to relate everything to what I know from the late 90s and early 2000s 3D collectathons. Additionally, I'm not a game developer. I guarantee everything I criticize has been considered by the developers. They're professional, and well, making games isn't exactly easy. So please excuse my anecdotal remarks and opinions. So the plot of Yooka-Laylee is very simple. Evil corporation is intruding and polluting our main character's home, eventually crossing our protagonist, kind of like Sonic the Hedgehog. Evil capital B wants to take away all the books and do I don't know what with, honestly. But he's taken Laylee's book and now he's in trouble. So you must travel through each of the worlds collecting pages as your MacGuffin. Once we have enough, we defeat capital B and roll credits. Nothing crazy, right? Certainly not going to spark any debates at this Tuesday's book club, Sharon? No, Yooka-Laylee makes up for its lack of story with its brilliant writing, character presentation, and environments. Much of the game is filled with gags and dry humor. Unfortunately, it's hard to swallow those crackers without water, because you'll be overwhelmed as to how much they actually keep talking. Fortunately, you can skip all the text and move on. Character design is very strong, and every character is easily identified and charming, save for a few in particular. Before I get into mechanics and level design, I want to discuss exactly what a collectathon is. So back in the late 90s, we were working with 3 major consoles in particular: the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and the Nintendo 64. In comparison to today, the hardware was kind of primitive, and kind of chugged along trying to handle 3D graphics. The Saturn and PlayStation used compact discs, while the 64 stuck to cartridges for one more generation. Early CDs were kind of limited in space, and carts were, well, carts, even more limited in space. The only benefit the CDs had were a little more space and CD quality music. Anyways, a lot of 3D design goes back to Super Mario 64. The big, oh my god, look what Nintendo did in 1996, quick, we gotta redesign Gex the Gecko to use third dimension. So the big trend was to make, well, collectathons. The large areas we could run around collecting things. It was the most effective use of the space for the medium, as well as a decent way to get your 2D mascot into this newfangled Z-axis. The genre would continue to evolve until around 2003, where games like Grand Theft Auto 3 came out and influenced everyone to turn their series into a mission-based game instead. So as you know, a 3D collectathon is an exploratory genre where you romp around looking for trinkets and power-ups in order to unlock more trinkets and more power-ups, generally mixing in platforming as well. After doing some exploration for the medium, I noticed a trend. There are a few types of them. Linear collectathons, where you follow a basic path that has slight deviations and challenges along the way, or after the end, but you should be able to get the most of the required items along the way. It also often loops back to the start so you can go and get what you missed. These are games like Spyro the Dragon, Dial the Tasmanian Tiger, Sly Cooper, and Hat in Time. I'd say this was the easiest to work with, as Nintendo kept designing 3D Mario games like Sunshine and Galaxy to be like this, whilst expanding on the genre. They can be more open, but they generally stick to one objective at a time. While split linear is where at the very start of the game, you have several paths you can follow. Each path leads to an objective that also loops back to the started level to pick another path. This is best demonstrated by the first Ratchet & Clank. Then we have stuff that's open world, where you start anywhere on the level and are free to complete any objective in the surrounding area at any time. Mario 64 is the most famous example, but stuff like Banjo-Kazooie, Yooka-Laylee, and Mario Odyssey fit this ideal. Of course, genres of game design kind of float, so you'll see different traits of each type bleeding into each other. And the last thing I want to mention that most of these games have is a hub world. The hub world is the rest period between adventures, practice area for new players, or even have numerous secrets hidden throughout the area for you to hunt down. Yooka-Laylee keeps this tradition with Hyrule Towers. It leads to other worlds for you to explore, but also to unlock and receive upgrades. Okay, firstly let's start with world design. Each of the worlds are cute and charming in their own ways. They effectively convey different environments for you to climb and explore while sprinkling in their own mini challenges that can only be done there, i.e. gambling related stuff in the casino or swamp traversal in the marsh. I do want to mention, I was only caught in a gay baby jail once, so not bad to be honest. I found my major grievance of the worlds is the expansion system. If you spend some of your extra pages, you can make the world even bigger and find even more pages. This is immediately a problem because you cannot have the expanded world of the first chapter on your first visit, which you could argue makes it more digestible for players, but a lot of people's first impressions are extremely negative of the game based on this first chapter. You need 100 out of 145 pages in total to fight the final boss of the game. I understand that they likely were trying to pace and scale the game so you can complete as much as you can in the game without perfecting it. In addition to the poor first impressions, I really don't like how they want you to return to previous levels with more abilities or unlocks. For instance, you need to expand the first world in order to get all 5 of the Ghost Riders. I don't really have a problem with that for later levels, but for the first world I think it doesn't fit. You also need to come back many times with different abilities too often. I know most 3D collectathons do this on a lesser scale. Introducing new mechanics you can add to previous levels is a staple of the genre. You get this, oh yeah, kind of feeling when you get a new ability and want to revisit a previous level. My problem is that there's far too much of that. I personally would like to get at least 90% of the level finished before I leave, if not all of it. But there's so many things to go back and collect with different abilities, I honestly forgot about them, which kind of damages my perceived value of a collectible.
Haven't I told you already? Find 15 golden cogs and bring them to my lab in Rainbow Cliffs.
Okay, I've mentioned I've never played Banjo-Kazooie, sure, but I've inferred this could be a normal issue amongst several rare titles, like Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64. Giving your players a purpose to collect all these trinkets is likely the most challenging thing in this genre. I enjoyed finding Ghost Riders, as they generally require their own mini-challenge to obtain. They remind me of a more thought-out Bilby from Tasmanian Tiger. I think pages are great as they serve that large, get this item to win, many collectathons require. And seeing that number tick up gives me a sense of progression and accomplishment. What I don't like is hunting for quills. Let's compare quills to Spyro's gems. They're scattered throughout the level and you've got to obtain each of them to get a 100% score. The difference is that quills aren't as easy to see and are never where you would think a quill would be. Both Spyro and Yooka-Laylee use these as money as well, in order to act as keys for more areas, or to unlock abilities that also act as keys. The other difference is that gems are satisfying to collect, and you can always find them by pressing all 4 shoulder buttons that have sparks act as a radar. You don't use all your gems to spend, but that's okay, because you don't have much trouble finding them anyways. Finding quills, however, is slow and arduous. You don't have to spend them on anything but abilities, which is fine, but how about some upgrades? More health and stamina? Yes, I know you can find them as their own item to obtain, but how about let me spend the quills rather than give me another item to collect? Quills take too long to obtain, so being rewarded for collecting them peters out near the end, and I don't really want to keep collecting them all. The other issue is that you don't do anything with them once you get all of them. New super bonus world or new ability. Anyways, the pages are fine, but some of the methods for obtaining them get awfully annoying. I've already mentioned that the issue with the world design stems from returning to levels too often, which in turn relates to how you have to make frequent trips to get all the levels pages. But the other big offender is the Rextro arcade. You visit this arcade in order to play a minigame and collect a pagey from Rextro. That's fine, only you have to beat it twice to get the second paging. Second step seems to generally want you to get a high score, which oftentimes I already had gotten on the first go, so it just feels wasteful. If they designed and programmed this minigame, why not use it to a fuller potential? Then we have the enemies, the goons, the mooks, the pawns, the baddies. We've learned from Paper Mario Sticker Star that having enemies to fight is worthless if there's no benefit in engaging them. In Sticker Star, you only get coins and sometimes stickers for beating enemies. It's a slow process that often requires you to spend your stickers in order to beat them. There's no death or challenge to these fights, so it feels wasteful to use items on a fight you're likely to have a net loss on. And the only reason I bring this up is because there's no reason for you to engage the mooks scattered throughout the world. Sure, they often die in a single hit, and I'm sure that's intentional, but they're also not threatening and rarely in your way. I'm going to keep bringing this game up, but Spyro does this far more effectively. In Spyro 1, you get a gem for killing the Norks. While in Spyro 2, you see a spear get released. When these spirits are released, they go to power up a gate. That gives you a brief timed power up, but the reward is tangible and understood. However, I would like to mention the boss fights are really fun and enjoyable. I especially liked being surprised with the security robot in the Capital Casino level while riding the minecart. The majority of the boss fights are actually very well designed. I would just like to argue that the final fight at Capital B is pretty annoying. Not only is it not immediately clear on how to handle some parts, but the camera got in the way far too often. It's very hard to tell the depth perception of these missiles as you try to aim the back of the boss. Control-wise, if you play a 3D platformer, you'll be able to handle just fine. At your immediate disposal, you'll be able to run around and jump. But when you meet Trowser the Snake, he'll give you more abilities to unlock and learn, such as a tail whip and a roll. I really enjoyed rolling around the map, however it consumes quite a fair bit of your stamina, so I immediately equipped the roll tonic to lower the amount of stamina that's used. An important point I want to mention is that I really expected to dislike certain mechanics. As soon as I felt Yooka awkwardly swimming like Mario 64, I was immediately worried there was going to be some awful swimming mechanics. At some point you're given the ability to blow an air bubble around yourself, so you're basically moving around on land, but underwater. Many of this game's water traversing and item collecting involves creating and releasing this bubble around you. My other major worry was when I heard you're able to fly as your final ability unlock. I really expected this to tarnish all the collecting and platforming you had to do to get to this point. However, you really can't get this ability without doing many of the challenges along the way. In fact, the final level is completely designed with this ability in mind. This doesn't mean you can't use the ability to reach places easier, but it's not nearly as problematic as I envisioned. Playtonic very clearly designed the ability progression properly. This game also does have a habit of over-talking or over-explaining when introducing new abilities or transformations. I skipped the majority of the tutorial dialogue and I knew exactly what each ability was able to do on my own. If anything, that's a massive testament for how well the game conveys its mechanics and teaches them to a player. What do you do with the snowplow? Plow away snow. Turn into a flower? I guess I'm pollinating. This ship shoots fire, ice, and cannonballs? You immediately realize you're going to have to clear the debris as you sail through the galaxy.
Hey man, are you ready for this?
Yeah, I was ready 20 years ago.
Okay, let's do this.
Here we go.
Oh, it's finally time. Oh, thanks to you, it's the game revival. You helped
The last things I need to discuss for this review. Is this Banjo-Kazooie? Who is this game for? Did the reception from this game justify the $2 million in Kickstarter funding? Okay, so no, this game is not Banjo-Kazooie. It's Banjo-Kazooie with a funny hat. I've never played Banjo, so I'm not able to compare it piece by piece, but by God, it wears the duo on its face. Honestly, when it comes to trying to decide who this game is for, I feel like this game doesn't even know. You see, this game really wants you to remember how much you enjoyed Banjo-Kazooie as a kid, but it's afraid to fully add in extra challenge and complexity for fear that it would alienate its children. Now, I'm not saying that's a problem. This is not another case of thing bad, but rather thing exist. Playtonic did add an N64 filter into the game, which I believe was a Kickstarter goal, but all that does is remove all the lighting, lower the frame rate, lower the texture resolution, and add in a strange tube TV filter, complete with scan lines and noise. Honestly, I can't bear to look at this, and I think they could have done a much better job. I don't think people that grew up with the 64 really played games with scan lines in comparison to a Super Nintendo kit. I hadn't timed this filter far better in my opinion. It doesn't burn my eyes, but it also does exactly what I would expect in the filter. 4:3 ratio, low poly hat kit, and some light noise. I'll try to cover nostalgic gimmicks like these in a future video. Last thing we have to talk about is this game's legacy. Its reception. Many people I know don't care to try the game, simply due to negative press across the board. I really don't want to fault this game for that. It's more of an ongoing problem throughout the industry. Everyone is super picky about how they want their nostalgia presented. If Pokemon Mega Ruby doesn't give me goosebumps whilst I watch the intro, I'm burning down Masuda's mansion. You can look at websites like Metacritic to get average review scores, but I don't feel like it's a good way to judge the medium. A game is more than the sum of its parts, and you can't just score games like you grade a math test. And I'll admit it, like many others, I saw the 70s and 60s review scores and I was hesitant to look into it, but I genuinely enjoyed coming to this game. Throughout Yooka-Laylee, I remained curious and saw it through to the end. I look forward to looking at Banjo-Kazooie as well one day. Maybe once I get an Xbox One to play my copy of Rare Replay. If you're interested in supporting games and developers like Playtonic, I suggest giving Yooka-Laylee a shot. This has been Saffron. Thanks for listening.